Alrighty, so stage 4 of the revolution. We looked at stage 3 last time and said that the Directory was overall very unsuccessful. They were not very productive during their time in power, and the Directory comes to an end. You should have read about this. The Directory comes to an end when Napoleon stages a coup, or a coup d'etat. So this is in 1799, which is why when you saw the end of the Directory, that's where it is. The Directory, which was created by the Constitution of 1795. So, of course, when Napoleon comes into power, they write a new constitution, which gives him the title of First Consul of France, which really just gives him real power. He has pretty much unlimited power, which we kind of have to pause here for a second and ask ourselves, is that something that is reflective of the revolutionary ideals? Right? One person who has complete and total control. That's essentially what he's getting when he gets the title of First Consul of France. So, because Napoleon is so popular, a little background on Napoleon. I said he was rising to popularity during the Directory's time in power because he was a very successful military general. Under Napoleon's rule, France is able to actually accomplished several military victories. So Napoleon is very well known by the French people. Here's a little tidbit about Napoleon, is that he's not actually from France. He is from Corsica, which is a little island off the coast of Italy. It's a French territory at this time, but he didn't actually grow up in France. So he went to a school that was or a military school. So that's kind of how he was raised. So that's kind of his background, a little bit about his background. So he was raised to be in the military. And during his time in the military, this is when he gains popularity because he is such a skilled military leader and military general. So once he takes this power as first consul of France, shortly into his reign, this is when we see the Napoleonic Wars begin. And the reason why these start is because during the revolution, if you remember in 1792, during stage 2, the revolutionary government pretty much declared war on all of Europe. So France was pretty much at war with several European countries and had caused instability throughout Europe and in France, clearly. So while France is also experiencing this revolution and political upheaval, they were also spending money on war. So good for France that Napoleon was very successful in most of these wars. And during this time, under Napoleon's rule, during the Napoleonic Wars, he is able to actually conquer and gain control of most of Western Europe, except for Great Britain. And obviously, when we get to the borders of Russia, he's not going to be able to conquer Russia either. So for Napoleon, or under Napoleon's rule, his time of success is kind of like these first couple of years, 1799 to 1803. And so I really like this picture of him because I feel like it depicts, kind of how the people see him in his, first couple of years as first consul of France, as the leader of France, because he is very successful. And this is what he's known for being a really successful military general. So during the Napoleonic Wars, he does conquer most of Western Europe. Under his rule, he also reestablishes the agreement with the Catholic Church, so kind of making that alliance with the Catholic Church. However, at this time, the church's power has waned. So remember, after the Protestant Reformation, we talked about that in Unit 4, the church lost a lot of followers and a lot of influence, especially in Northern Europe. And so having France back kind of as an ally strengthens the church, but it's important to remember that the Pope at this time really doesn't have much political power. But having France right now as an ally is an asset for the church because France controls most of Western Europe. So, as Napoleon is actually taking over these different Western European countries, he's placing people in power that are loyal to him. And a lot of them are his family members as well. So kind of interesting. And it's important to remember that he kind of had control over these parts of Western Europe because he would place leaders in power that were loyal to him. So this is a good alliance for the Catholic Church. And so when Napoleon in 1804 decides to kind of change the political structure of France, the Catholic Church is present for this, and Napoleon decides that he is going to declare himself Emperor of France. So we need to pause again. And Napoleon was already first consul, which pretty much gives him unlimited power. But now he's taking this title as emperor, right? So it's essentially putting back in to place that hereditary power that the monarchy had. Because remember, France is now an empire. That's why he gets this title of emperor. It controls not only France, but other territories throughout Europe. So it's not just France, it's expanded its borders at this point. So that's why he gets the title of emperor. But Napoleon said that the surest way to create stability for France is to make sure that there is hereditary power. So meaning like the power is passed down through the bloodline. There's, the security of a successor afterwards. And so the people actually agree to this in a plebiscite, in a vote. And they agree to give him this title of Emperor of France. And so Napoleon, during the ceremony where he's being crowned, he actually crowns himself, which traditionally during the ceremony, Napoleon would have been crowned by the Pope of the Catholic Church. But this is kind of showing us two things. One, Napoleon thought himself above the power of the Pope in the Catholic Church. And it also shows us, too, that the Catholic Church's power has again really diminished at this point. So after Napoleon is emperor, he also creates the Napoleonic Code. So you do need to know what the Napoleonic Code is. This is a unified law code, which actually does stabilize France because it requires everyone to, they are subject to the same laws. However, it does limit the rights and the freedoms of the people in France, of the French citizens. So again, not only is he emperor, we have one ruler with hereditary who's established that after he dies, the power is going to be passed down through his bloodline. So we've kind of got essentially a monarchy, but we have an emperor, right, because of the amount of territory that he controls. So someone with unlimited power. And now we also have a law code that limits their rights, which is something that the Third Estate at the beginning of the revolution was looking to establish. So people here, because of their trust in Napoleon, were willing to kind of forfeit some of those rights for a stable government. Okay, so here's a picture. This is actually Napoleon crowning his wife, Josephine. And you can see here is the church official there in the background. So that is no longer his job to place the crown upon Josephine's head. That is given to Napoleon, again, signifying that Napoleon's power is much greater than his. Okay, so in fact, all of these Catholic Church officials are taking a seat back here. All right, so after this, after 1804, Napoleon starts to make some mistakes. I said he'd conquered pretty much all of Western Europe except for Great Britain. So in order to conquer Great Britain, he decides that he's going to essentially starve them out. He's going to place a blockade on Britain because Britain is an island country. However, this is a huge fail because Britain has a strong navy. And at this point, Napoleon has spent so much money on war that it's getting really expensive. He spent a lot of money on a war with Portugal and Spain, which was also a failure. So we've got two military failures now. And finally, when he goes to invade Russia, which I said he had also not expanded into because it's Eastern Europe, he fails to invade Russia. And I said, thanks to the winter. So the Russians are actually going to use this tactic several times over. Whenever Russia notices that they are being invaded, we're going to see this a couple times throughout history after this point, that as the Russian army retreats, they're going to destroy pretty much everything that they're leaving behind. So in this case, the Russian army was destroying the crops so that Napoleon's army couldn't gain any kind of food sustenance. Their supply lines would have been low. So they're destroying everything kind of as they retreat further into Russia. And as Napoleon's army is retreating further into Russia, obviously time is going by. And by the time Napoleon decides to retreat, the winter is there. And the French troops are not prepared for the Russian winter. It's incredibly cold. And so a lot of people die from starvation or freeze to death. So there really isn't necessarily a specific battle here that defeats Napoleon. It's really the Russian winter that is kind of the final nail in the coffin for him and his military. So when he gets back to when he gets back to France, it's well known that he has been defeated, he surrendered, and he has failed. And so at this point, France is tired of fighting wars. They've already experienced a revolution. So they exile him to this small little island off of Italy called Elba. Here's the thing, though. Elba is easily accessible. And so for Napoleon, in 1815, he organizes an escape and he returns to power in France. So they kick him out, but he essentially comes back. He decides that he's going to fight another war, but he is defeated at Waterloo by the British, and he is exiled again. This time, they make sure to exile him to a place that is much more remote, much further away, St. Helena, which is off the coast of Africa. You can barely see it on a map. If you Google it, it really isn't even visible on the map. You have to zoom in on Google Earth to see St. Helena. That's how tiny it is. So that's where they put Napoleon, and that is where he dies. So there you go. You can see it, that little blip. That's where they exile him to. So he doesn't come back from this one. That is where he dies. So after Napoleon dies, the French monarchy that had previously been in place is restored. So a family member of Louis XVI, who had been executed during the Revolution, is restored to power. He takes the title of Louis XVIII. So his nephew was supposed to have been Louis XVII, but if you remember, Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette's children died in jail. So as kind of an honorary or a way to honor his memory, he did not take the title of Louis XVII. He goes ahead and skips that and takes Louis XVIII. And so they reinstate the monarchy in France with a couple of conditions. He needs to sign a new constitution in 1814 when he comes to power, and he has to forfeit some of his powers. And this creates a limited monarchy in France. It makes him a constitutional monarch with limited powers, where Parliament is able to create and vote on laws. So he cannot he doesn't have that power, where previously the absolute monarch had complete and total control over all aspects of the country. Now the king's power has been indeed limited. So this is where France lies after Napoleon's fall. And this is essentially the end of stage 4 of the revolution. So if we're kind of looking overall at the success, stage 4 is kind of up and down, right? We have a man who takes complete and total control, Napoleon, who does make some successful reforms for France, but ultimately fails. And then they actually restore the monarchy in France. But they do create a system of checks and balances. They create a constitutional monarchy, which limits the monarch's powers, which was one of their original goals during the revolution. So we kind of have a mixed bag here. So successful in the final stages of stage 4, where Louis XVIII is created as Louis XVIII is created as a limited constitutional monarch, but unsuccessful where Napoleon had taken complete and total control over France during his time in power. So here's kind of an overview of what we just said. Napoleon, one man who seized power, not really what the revolution was about. He did bring stability with his law code, but they inevitably end up bringing back the monarchy. Revolutionaries had sought to get rid of the monarchy, but this was constitutional monarchy, so there was a separation of power. So we still see some representation of Enlightenment ideas here. So successful in that aspect. So after the constitutional monarchy is established, I just want to talk about the Congress of Vienna really quick. So I said that Napoleon had conquered most of Western Europe during his time in power, and it made France into an empire. So after Napoleon is exiled and removed from power, and France is, stable again, there is a meeting, the Congress of Vienna, that is called. So you do need to know what the Congress of Vienna is called. Basically, all of these traditional rulers in Europe met. So people who had previously been in power before Napoleon had taken control over their countries. They feel like they need to reestablish the boundaries of their countries in Europe after Napoleon. And this is during the time when we get into Unit 7, when the feeling of nationalism is growing. And nationalism is going to be one of those things that can unify a country. It can bring people together for a common cause out of passion and support for their country, or it can divide a country, because we'll see that a lot of these kingdoms, these empires that still exist at the time, even after the Congress of Vienna, they still encompass several ethnic groups that may not necessarily identify with the ruler in power. So in some cases, nationalism is going to bring certain groups together to break away from their country or their empires that they're currently under control of, and establish countries and boundaries and borders of their own. But the Congress of Vienna is successful by reestablishing the traditional borders that kind of had existed before Napoleon, and it prevented war for 40 years. So we're not going to see really the effects of nationalism until a little while down the road, but this is when the effects of nationalism are going to start to kind of seep in, especially after revolutionary governments have kind of come in and taken place. So this is where we're going to stop. This is the end of your French Revolution notes. So make sure you have those finished. You guys have a quick reading again on stage 4 of the Revolution. Make sure that you guys are reviewing your vocab, and you do know things like the Congress of Vienna, and like the National Assembly and different forms of government that had taken control during the French Revolution. So you might want to go back over your notes, listen to these again. I know that we talked about a lot of different names and people, so it might be beneficial for you to re-listen a few times or another time, kind of go back into your notes and just make sure that you review, because the French Revolution does have a lot of changing of powers. So I know that it can be confusing. So go ahead and finish your activity after this, your assessment, and review the vocab and review notes.